Welcome to Smash Avro Property. Today I'm speaking with Daniel Walsh. He's a 29-year-old with a property portfolio worth $4 million. And if that isn't impressive in itself, he's currently running at a 50% LVR. He talks to us about the strategies he's implemented to keep his debt so low. Daniel gives us so many little tips and tricks throughout this podcast. He talks about them as if they are common knowledge, so listen closely so you don't miss them. Tips like this little golden nugget about negotiation.
That when it comes time to negotiate with an agent, that you know that market, you know the streets better than they do, because that's what they do every day is they walk those streets, they letterbox drop, they sell property in those streets. So they know more than you at the start. You've got to learn that market so that you know more than them when it comes time to purchase.
As always, seek your own professional financial, legal and property investing advice for your current situation. Everything we talk about is just our opinion and general in nature and should never be considered as personal advice. So without any further ado, let's get house hunting with Daniel. Daniel Walsh, welcome to Smash Avro Property.
Thanks for having me, Jordan.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you today. We had a little chat pre-podcast there and got to delve into how you operate and how your business runs and some of your insights. So I'm just keen to share that with our listeners. But to get us started, I mean, what really inspired you to get into property investing in the first place? And how old were you when you started?
Yeah, well, I guess I've always been around property per se. My parents were into property, developing, flipping properties, renovating properties. So from a very young age, we were spending most of our weekends looking at properties, working out how we can make money from properties. And I guess from just me sitting in the back seat the whole way through that journey with my parents, I guess understood how they made money in property and what they were looking for in types of properties and stuff like that. So I've always sort of been around it. For myself, I actually started researching and really heavily getting into property at the age of 16. And I guess the reason why was I started working with my dad as an auto electrician. So I was on $254 a week in the first year, which isn't very much. And it kind of, I guess I looked at that situation and was like, I don't want to do this for the next 30 years. I don't want to be an auto electrician. I don't want to just be working and, just paying the bills. I actually wanted to thrive. I wanted to build a portfolio and be able to exit the workforce earlier. And I do remember, working for my dad and sitting down with my dad, and we had, some conversations around it. And I remember him saying to me, he said, you know what, I've had a business for 35 years, but I've always made more money out of property, and it was always the money from the business always went into property, and that's where he really generated his wealth. So that sort of resonated with me. And I just really understood from that time on that it's not just about making money, but it's like, where are you going to put this money? How are you going to expand on the income that you've already got and then create the wealth for the future so that within 15, 20 years, you no longer have to go to work, or if you do want to go to work, it's a choice at that time.
Yeah, I think that's phenomenal when the realization kicks in that, you've only got one life and you can choose what you want to do every single day. And you've obviously found property as your vehicle to enable you to do what you want to do every day. And it sounds like you are doing it now and you're loving what you are doing. But and for the listeners that are in that sort of same category, they're sort of 15, 16, aspirating to be property investors themselves, but maybe on a low income. I mean, how did you possibly go from earning $240 a week to buying your first property and saving your deposit?
Yeah, I mean, it's always tough in the early days. And I still, talk heavily with a lot of young people that are starting out and they're thinking that I guess it's impossible. They think it's going to be very hard to get into the market. And I don't think things have really changed that much. It's always been hard to get into the market. You've got to put in some dedication and hard work to save your deposit. And I guess for me, it was no different. If you don't come from a family where they're going to give you money to be able to start investing, or and you've got to do it on your own, like I did, I had to save for 4 years to get my first deposit together. And again, I was on a low wage, so for me, it was about making sure that I had a budget, making sure that everything I did, I was very mindful of what I was spending, because I knew that everything that I earned, I tried to save as much as I could so that I could put it into a property as soon as I could. And I guess it really just comes down to knowing what your goal is, and then just continually working at that and not getting discouraged that it's going to take you maybe a few years to do it. I think a lot of people, within a year or two, they just get discouraged and then go to Europe and blow all the money, whereas for me, it was like, I'm going to stay the course for however long it's going to take, and I'm going to get that first property. I knew it was going to be the hardest property, to get. And that's just because I'm coming from nothing, straight out of school, into a really low paying job. I've really got to save my money to be able to do that. And I think a lot of young people are in the same position, but you've just got to do what you got to do. And just things like, I didn't go out and party. I stayed at home a lot of the time. If I did go out, I was very mindful of what I spent. I had a little system where what I did was, when I got my wage and the wage came in, what I would do is allocate some of that funds into a bank account that I had no card to. And why I did that was, if I did go out, if I did go party or something like that, what I didn't want to do is go into that savings where I was saving for my house. I didn't want to go into that and start blowing that money. So I was always conscious of that. So I made sure I had no card to it. I couldn't transfer money very easily. It took me, a day or two for it to come across. So by doing that, I was very diligent in the way that I saved. I always saved a portion of my income. And I always was looking at, how much money I had in the bank, how close I was to getting to my goals. And it took me around that 4-year mark, actually, before I got into my first property.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's such a tough period too, like 4 years between 16 and 20. And there's so much changing. You're finishing high school, you're seeing girls, everyone's out partying, drinking, traveling. Like, there's so many things that you could be spending your money on, but you obviously had your head screwed on and saw how your parents had created wealth through property and had that vision and determination to stay the course. So I think you did exceptionally well there. And I think hiding the money in a bank account is awesome. Like the transaction taking longer than 2 days is so phenomenal, because before you're about to press transfer, you're like, oh, well, I'm not going to get the money until 2 days anyway. So whatever I'm about to spend it on, it doesn't matter. I can't get it. And that's one of my secret things. Even if people ask me how to save, I always say, create a separate bank account, get your mum to put in a password and not tell you, and you just transfer money into that bank account, and you can't touch it unless you really need it in the worst case scenario. You know what I mean? So
yeah, definitely. And not only that, like, it's you've got to have that, and you've got to have the savings, but you also got to make sure that, I guess, a lot of young people, the very first thing they do is they go out there and they go get debt somehow, and it's not good debt. They're not getting house debt. What they're doing is they're either going overseas and they're blowing money and putting it on a credit card, or they're going to get a car loan so they can go buy a brand new car. Things like that was where I recognized that would set me back. So instead of driving a $50,000 car, which a lot of people I see do, and a lot of my mates were doing at the time, I'd drive a $1,500 car. So it was about, how can I reduce all my expenses, have no debt, make sure that I'm living lean, and that way, I'm going to get to my goals a lot quicker. So the saving, and making sure that you do that well, but also making sure that you're keeping your expenses under control. You're not taking on bad debt at a young age, because that's going to set you back, because you're paying all these other bills and then there's not as much money left over to save.
Yeah, spot on. I think that's perfect. Spend less than you earn, really, and invest the rest, or save the rest until you've got a big enough deposit. And speaking of saving for a deposit, how big was the first deposit that you saved, and then what sort of property did you get into, and what price point?
Yeah, so when I first saved for my first property, I actually saved 34,000. So that got me into my first property. I did a 5% deposit. So back then it was, you could get 5% deposit. So I put a 5% deposit together, saved my $34,000. I bought a block of land that was subdivided. So it was in an established area. It was subdivided, bought the block of land, built the house on top of that. So I was very, early on, I recognized that, I couldn't go out there and buy the $600,000 and $800,000 house. So for me, it was like, okay, I'm going to have to start small. So I bought my first house, built it. It owed me around that sort of $325,000 mark. That was all in. That was land, that was built, and it was around my area as well. And then I rented that one out at the time for about $450 a week. So I already had positive cash flow on that property. I knew that property was going to leverage me into the next property over time. So I just was, trying to get my money together to be able to purchase that first property. Even, I was stretching myself so much that back then I actually was sort of, getting into skydiving at that point, and I had some skydiving gear, and I had to sell the skydiving gear and give it up just so I could put a driveway in, because I couldn't finish the property with the money that I had. And I was literally down to like my last 1,000 when I finished it. So I was, very diligent and knowing that I didn't have much money and that I had to make that money go as far as I possibly could. So I put the least amount of money I could in, which was just the 5% deposit.
Yeah, that's crazy. And that's a true factor of delayed gratification. Selling something that you thoroughly enjoy to fund and stay the course is a phenomenal, and obviously so it shows your dedication to wanting to be successful in the property space. And obviously it's paid off, and let's see by how much. So how old are you now, and how's the portfolio looking?
Yeah, so currently now 29. I have just over 4 million in my property portfolio now. My debt sits roughly just under the 2 million mark now. So roughly around the 2 million. So it's about sort of 50, just under 50% LVR. So I had been focusing on paying down some debt over the last couple of years. But yeah, so the portfolio is going quite nicely at the moment.
I could just imagine 50% LVR, mate. That's insane, especially at 29. How did you manage that? Have you been paying down the debt, or have you just not been refinancing and pulling out equity? How did you manage to get a 50% LVR on $4 million?
Yeah, well, I mean, I could have built a portfolio larger and probably got to take equity out of some properties, but I left a lot in there as well. But over time, it's just naturally buying the right markets. The markets, some of those markets have doubled since I bought. So that naturally brings your LVR down without you paying off debt. But the last couple of years, I have focused on paying off some debt as well. So I paid, around that sort of 2-year mark, I've been paying principal and interest, I think, on about 7 of my 9 properties. So I've been quite heavily reducing debt over the last 2 years.
Yeah, that's great. And is that sort of your goal now for your property investment journey? Are you trying to get that LVR down as much as possible? Are you still acquiring property? I mean, what sort of phase do you think that you're in?
Yeah, so I guess my first phase was obviously building the largest portfolio I could at that time that I could cash flow. Then it got to a point where obviously I ran out of serviceability. So like most people, you hit a serviceability wall. From that point, I went, okay, now it's time to pay down some debt, let some of these properties grow for a little while, which I did over the last sort of 2 years. And now I'm back into that stage where I'll probably, I'm looking to add maybe another $1 million this year to the portfolio to start increasing it again. So I'm sort of in my second half of accumulation phase. And then again, I'll go through that accumulation phase. I'll buy a bit more property. And then again, I'll focus on paying maybe a little bit more of that debt back down to get myself back into that position. But overall, it's just sort of looking at my cash flows from the total portfolio that I have, having a look at where that is and making sure that I'm comfortable with where it is. I've already built a fairly large portfolio. So, for me, I've always built my portfolio in line with my lifestyle. I didn't want it to hurt my lifestyle too much. So yes, in the early days, I had to sacrifice, but now that I have sacrificed, I built that portfolio. I now look at it more so and say, okay, I can now enjoy, I guess, the fruits of my labor, and I can still add to the portfolio, but I don't need to crush myself over the next 10 years to be able to do that. I've already created the passive income. It already pays for my lifestyle. So now I'm just slowly increasing that passive income over time.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. And I think that sort of still shows your dedication to your portfolio. I mean, some people in your position would have a midlife crisis and go and buy a brand new car and, just blow some of that money. And although you're still enjoying your lifestyle, it doesn't sound like you're going crazy, but instead you're having a sort of mid portfolio crisis where you've stabilized your LVR and now you want to go again. And I think that just shows how, dedicated to your portfolio you are and your investing journey. So that's crazy, mate. That's probably one of the best stories that I've heard. So very well done. But let's walk through the process to where you got today. I mean, from the first one at 20, how long did it take you to get into the second one? And then was it sort of a ramp up effect? Like, have you bought a lot recently, or did you buy heavier early on in your 20s? I mean, how did you build that and how quickly did you build it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I think anyone has the same sort of journey where every property's been tough for me. There's no, you will never go through. And I see this sometimes with some of my clients or some of my friends where they're wanting to buy a property and it's hard. And they're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do it. I'm like, well, you're never going to get to that point where they're just throwing money at you every day and you can just go out there and buy as much as you want. It's always tough because what you're doing is pushing the barriers of where you're currently at. You're always pushing those barriers. So for me, obviously I bought my first property The year later, so I bought that in 2011. The year later, I had a little bit of equity in there and a little bit of cash as well, that I had saved up, and I actually leveraged out of that property. But what I did is I had to cross collateralize the first property with the second property, so hold it as securitization, to be able to buy the second one. I was 105% leveraged on the second one. So when you look at it, I'm at this stage around that sort of 20 years old. I'm looking at first property with 5% at the time deposit, second property 105% leveraged. So I'm pretty highly leveraged in the early days, and that's just because I had no cash. So I knew I wanted to get into property, just keep building. I knew the market was moving in Sydney, so I wanted to get in as soon as I could. And then from there, I actually had a 2-year break. So I did have a 2-year break. I actually saved some cash over that time, and I could have bought. And I guess that was probably one of my regrets. I actually had 2 properties that I did put under contract and then backed out of them in the cooling off period. So that deal itself in those 2 years, if I were to look at them now, both of those deals cost me $1 million in equity. So that's what they've gone up by, about 500 grand each. So that was a lesson learned from me, but I did have a 2-year break. And then from there, I think I bought another 2 or 3 properties in Brisbane. And then, sort of in the later half, I started ramping up that portfolio and bought a couple in Victoria and South Australia as well.
Yeah, wow. So it sounds like you're pretty well diversified. And then, obviously you went pretty hard on the LVR early on to sort of leverage yourself to get into your portfolio and start building up that capital growth, and then had that bit of a break. And then did you use some of that equity again to go again? Or you said you saved pretty hard. Was it a combination, or was it just purely savings?
Yeah, so the first one was obviously savings. Second one was mostly, I think it was from the equity from memory. And then when I had the break, the third and fourth one was all equity at that point. Then I think I went into my fifth one, the same thing. It was a bit of a combination between equity and cash. So it was sort of just seeing where my cash levels were at, seeing where my equity was at, where I wanted to draw equity from that point. And then, sort of just go from there. But I guess always throughout the journey, I've always been very mindful of the cash flow as well as the capital growth. So yes, you need the capital growth, and the capital growth helps you leverage into more properties. But I wanted to also make sure that I wasn't hindering the cash flow so that I was going to get stopped early. So I always bought, fairly neutral cash flow properties, so that, some of them were positive cash flow, some of them were neutral in the early days. And that was just so that when they did grow, I had that portfolio where it was paying for itself, or very closely paying for itself, but I could then leverage the equity out to keep buying.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. Wow, mate, I can't, the process is down packed. It sounds like you've really done your due diligence and figured out the best way to keep borrowing and lending there and working the banks and all that sort of stuff. But in that spread of properties, what do you think has been your most successful deal?
I've got 2 successful deals. Obviously, I've got to hand it to the first deal that I've ever bought, and that's just because it's doubled. So, I paid that sort of 320, 325, I think it owed me when I built it. And that house now is worth sort of around that 650 mark. So I've been able to double my money on that within it took me about 7-8 years to double my money in that property. Wow. But I guess that was probably the stepping stone for me to continue building my portfolio. Plus, it was the light bulb moment in my portfolio. It was the first property. It started working for me. I'd realized that it's grown in value. It was also giving me positive cash flow at that point. So I'm like, okay, it's giving me income. It's growing in value. So that was sort of a light bulb moment. Why can't I just keep repeating the process and doing it again and again and again? I'll be able to retire a lot earlier. One of my later deals I bought in Victoria, I paid $345 for the property, and it's a funny story actually. I almost lost the deal. So it was on for $329, and I said to her, I'll pay full price. And this to a lot of people would look at this and go, why would you pay full price? I knew the market was moving heavily in the area, and I just wanted the property. So I paid full price. I said, yep, I'm paying full price for it. The agent sort of went cold on me. He said yes, they agreed, everything. We'll wait, waiting for the contracts to be signed. And he just went cold on me for a day or two. And I just knew there was something up. He's fishing around for something more. I called him and he said, I've actually signed somebody else. And I'm like, what happened? You accepted my deal. And he said, yeah, no, there was a first home buyer. They came in and they're at 340. And I went, okay. I said, so can I jump up to 340? And he said, no, sorry, they've already signed. And I'm like, great. So I lost the deal, and I knew at that point I could have, forecasted it was probably about 30 to 40 grand under what it was probably worth. The people needed to get out of that property. And I realized that, and I thought, I've just missed this massive opportunity. The market's moving. I knew it was going to be really good for me. And then about a week later, he rang me back up. He said, those first home buyers failed finance. And I said, well, don't go back to market with it. I said, what do you want? And he said, 345. They want an extra 5. And I said, done, I'll buy it. I bought that property, and 18 months later, it was valued at 550,000. So I was very, very lucky that I got the deal back, and I made that equity gain. I could also, with that property, subdivide a block off, so off to the side, or if I wanted to, I could put 3 townhouses side by side on that as well. So, there's multiple options. And what I'd looked at from the last sort of, I guess, figures, if I do the 3 house or 3 townhouse development, it'll probably make me between sort of $700 to $1 million.
That's ridiculous. And that's a pure example of someone who has done their complete due diligence. Like, you completely understood the market, you completely understood the property, you completely understood its potential. And this is where I think a lot of people get caught up in, trying to buy under market value, or, negotiating the real estate agent down. Like, some people in that circumstance would go, oh, if it's advertised for 329 or whatever it is, why would I pay that? I should be paying 315, or try and negotiate the way down. But if you completely understand what, is about to happen, what its true value is. And that's another big one too, is understanding what the difference between price and value is. And you obviously understood what the property's value was, and saw that it was still underpriced for its value, and executed on the deal, and obviously saw some great results from it. So,
it's funny because, like, out of my portfolio, I got 3 properties that I've actually paid. So one of them, I think I negotiated $5,000 or $6,000 off. The other 2 of those properties I paid full price for. And, if you have a look at it and people say, why would you do that? You're not good at negotiating. I said, well, I was, because I realized that when I bought those properties for full price, they were still under market value at full price, that the agent didn't know what they were doing, or they didn't know what it should be listed for. So I knew I was getting a good deal because I knew the market so well. And all 3 of those properties have doubled in value. And I knew the market was moving quickly. So more so it was, okay, it's not here you've got to, I guess, look at the market for what it is and say, is it a market that I should be negotiating heavily in? Or is this a market that I just need to get into because it is growing and I need to get in before it, I've missed the growth. So I guess when it comes down to this whole under market value and all that, you've really got to see it for what it is. There's definitely deals where you can buy under market value and you pay full price for it. It just comes down to what they listed it for, and is it really worth that? I've found properties even for clients where we've paid full price and it's still 30, 40 grand under comparables. It's just that it's an outer area agent that really didn't know what they're doing, or it might have been just somebody that needed to sell really quickly.
Yeah, and it's kind of showing your dominance and sealing the deal. If I was selling a house and, someone came along and wanted to give me the asking price, I'd be super excited. I'd sign the contract straight away. And that's how you sort of get these deals done, is make it a win-win scenario, because you understand the true value of the property, but you make it a win for the vendors as well. And they just want to get the contract done. There's no real competition there. So,
well, even like when you look at it, right, you could lose a deal over $5,000 because you tried to negotiate it so hard. And let's say you lose it for $5,000, it doubles in value over the next 5-10 years for you. Well, for $5,000, I mean, 10 years later, you would have looked at it and went, I would have just paid that $5,000. It's doubled in value now. So some people sometimes are looking too closely at the deal, and not looking at the value of the deal and what it can bring in the future to them. So I think they need to be looking more so at that. So is it the right deal? Are you paying a fair price for that deal? And will that deal, or the property that you're buying, will that, grow in value? If it's got everything that you want, don't lose it over $5,000, and I've seen it many times over in my industry and even myself, where in the early days, I've negotiated too hard, and some of these deals have doubled in value where I could have, increased my net worth by millions, really.
Yeah, I did exactly the same thing. I literally negotiated, or tried to negotiate down by $5,000. The vendor wouldn't sign. It sat on the market for 8 weeks after I put that offer in, because the vendor just wouldn't go down. And then a first home buyer came in, offered $5,000 more than I offered. They accepted, and I kind of still wanted to buy the property. I was just playing hard to get because it was a buyer's market. And, this was just before the election, and I missed out. Like they got the property, they wouldn't sign with me because I played too hardball. And, if I didn't get another deal after that, I could have missed out on buying in a low season in a buyer's market. So that's such an essential point to get. If you've got a property and you've done all the hard work, if you've got a building and pest inspection done, and you've already half invested in the property, it's not worth a $5,000 conversation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it just comes down to knowing the market conditions. You've got to be so involved in that market that you know what that property's worth. You should know what you're willing to go to. And like I said, the market conditions determines how you negotiate that deal.
Yeah, spot on, mate. So my next question is, how do you assess the investment potential of a property? And going through your portfolio, I kind of want to break this down into two segments. So what drove you to buy these properties that you knew were going to do so well in the next couple of years? Like, how did you sort of, not that you could forecast what was going to happen in the future, but what made you give indicators of there might be potential good capital growth here? And then what are you sort of looking for now for your clients and assessing when it comes to a property?
Yeah, well, I guess firstly, it comes down to the location over the property. A lot of people, the first thing they do is they're going to buy an investment property and they're like, okay, let's go out there. Let's go out and look at properties. It's like, hang on, have you done your research on the areas first? Have you broken down the state first? So you've got to look at Australia wide, not just be looking in your backyard. And for me, I've always been like that. Okay, it's got nothing to do with where I live. It's got nothing to do with the demographics. It's really coming down to, why is that area going to grow? And that's all I'm looking for. So what I'm doing firstly is looking at the state by state. Where is the economy at in that state? Is it growing economically? Is population growing? And once I figured out roughly the state that I want to be buying in, and again, that's going to also come back down to roughly the yields or rental return that you're looking for as well. I then hone down into the state, and then from there I start to draw sort of a radius out of the CBD, and it's generally an hour out of the CBD that I draw that radius. And then I just start to, segment each market there and each council and start to look and break those councils down. Then from there, I break down the councils and work out what councils are growing and why they're growing, what's making them more livable. I ask generally 10 questions on that, and I continue to repeat those same 10 questions for every market that I buy in, so I can see the differences over time. And also I can look back at the markets that have doubled and see why they doubled. And then from there, once I've broken down that location, that's when it comes down to, okay, we've found the council. Now we've found the suburbs within that council. Now it's time to hone down and actually get on the ground and start to know that market intimately. I've got to know the suburbs. When it comes down to knowing the suburbs, you've got to know the good streets. You've got to know the bad streets. You've got to know why things are selling higher in one street compared to another, or one pocket to another. A lot of people don't understand that, where they'll buy in a pocket and it's cheaper by 50 grand than another pocket, and they buy the cheap one because it's cheap, but it might be in housing commission area. It might be that pocket has 40% housing, whereas the other pockets, majority owner occupied. So you've got to know that market so well that when it comes time to negotiate with an agent, that that market, the streets better than they do, because that's what they do every day, is they walk those streets. They letterbox drop. They sell property in those streets. So they know more than you at the start. You've got to learn that market so that you know more than them when it comes time to purchase. And then from there, like I said, once it comes down to purchasing the property, again, it comes down to, where's the good streets and bad streets? Where are you going to select? What type of dwelling you're looking for? So what's in demand in the area? You're always going to be looking at what's in demand in the area. You don't want to go buy a unit where families are living. You don't want to go buy a family house where people have to live in a unit because it's expensive. So you want to always be catering for the people that are going to be renting the property first, so you know what type of dwelling you're buying. And then it just comes down to, looking at things like, when I'm assessing a property, so let's say I'm going to a property and I'm walking through that property, what I'm looking at things like is the condition. What is the condition of this property? Is there anything that needs to be done to the property? Because I need to actually start to add that into what I believe true market value is for the property. So if it needs paint, it needs carpets, it may need a kitchen, I've got to work out okay, so if it needs a kitchen, that's going to cost me $15,000. I need to work out what the true value of the property is compared to other properties, and then work out, okay, it needs to be $15,000 less because I need to put a kitchen into it. So working out what that property needs. Then from there, I go in there and look at things like the house to land value ratio. So what I look at is, to determine an investment, is I've got to look at it and say, okay, how much am I putting into the land of this property, and how much am I putting into the house of this property? What's the ratios roughly? If I'm putting 70% into the land and maybe 30% into the house, I know that the land goes up in value, and I know the house depreciates over time. So it's a pretty good outcome. And I know that I'm putting most of my money into the appreciating part of the asset. Whereas if it's the other way around, and I'm putting, 70% into the building and putting only 30% into the house, into the land, then I know at that point that, my house is going to depreciate. It might not go up as much as I probably wanted it to. So you've got to look at the investment as a whole and go through it and look at it as a condition, look at its true value. And then from there, you've got to break it down and say, where is my money actually going in this deal? I like deals where I typically look at them and say, you know what, if I buy this, let's say it's a 4-bedroom house, 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2-car garage house. It's on a 600 square meter block. Let's say that if I worked out the price per square meter on what, somebody's selling land for, and let's say it was $400,000 for the land is what it would be worth. And yet I'm paying $450,000 for the whole deal, which is the house and the land. I know that a builder can't go out there and buy that block of land, put a house on it for $50,000. So if the market there is going to go up, I know that those properties are going to go up, because if a builder wants to build or sell a house and land package to somebody else, they're probably paying maybe in the 6s for that. Whereas I'm paying mid-4s because I'm buying something where the house has already actually done the depreciating side of things. It's already depreciated, and I'm putting all my money into that land. So it's, I guess, being conscious on where you're putting your money.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal approach. You've absolutely got no bias to states or areas or suburbs or places. You're really diversifying out, and I think that's where a lot of people get caught up in our generation. Is they start with a property first, and they go, oh, I want to buy this property in this area, and then they don't do the demographic research or the state research or everything. Where you actually you take a broader view and say, okay, what's going on currently in all these different markets? Then we'll break them down further. We'll look at the demographics. We'll see how income and population and all that type of growth is going. And then from there, you hone into the type of property. And yeah, as you say, the existing dwellings where 70% of the land content is the actual value is what you're drilling down on. So I couldn't disagree with anything that you said there. I think that's a phenomenal approach, and a great way to go about it. And I mean, you talked a little bit about before, how you do like capital growth, but you also have the passive income there to support you through the strategy. But I mean, what other people talk a little bit about manufacturing equity and doing renovation, and then there's this whole concept out there at the moment of these unicorn properties where you've got to take a snapshot in time and find all these perfect 3 elements to align to buy the best property. I mean, how do you sort of look at that approach of things and balance them out?
Yeah, I think with that, again, it comes down to the price point that you're paying for it. Have you factored the renovations in and stuff like that? So we have properties where we'll do renovations, but I walk through a house and look at different items to that and say, okay, does it need a bathroom reno? Because that's 20,000, or 15,000. Does it need a kitchen that's 15,000? Because there's some big ticket items. Whereas if you could walk through a property and go, okay, that needs paint and carpet, we could get out of this for $7,000 or $8,000. It's going to transform that house, and that house is going to look good, and it might add 20, 30 grand to its value at the end of it, just from, simple paint and carpets and maybe some blinds or something like that. So I think what happens is people don't understand when they're buying something cheap or buying something for good value. And sometimes people buy cheap, and they're buying cheap because they think, oh, well, yeah, it needs a renovation. They don't realize that the renovation is $50,000 plus, that it's a house where you need to redo the whole outside. You need to redo everything inside. It's got slate floors, and it's very hard to rip those floors up. And, it really comes down to, okay, are you doing it yourself if you're going to renovate it, but really working out that true cost. I think people don't truly understand that. You know, for me, I like to buy houses where if I can look at it and say, okay, somebody else has already done this hard work. They've already put a really good bathroom in it over time. They've already got, you know, a good kitchen in it. But you know what? The paint and carpets are pretty worn out. I could replace those and bring that house back up to looking brand new. And now all of a sudden that will increase its appeal to rent, but it also increase the value of the property as well. So I guess at the end of the day, you know, a lot of people do this renovation thinking it's going to have a massive uplift on the property, and it generally doesn't. What happens is the market has the uplift, right? So in the time of the renovation, the market might be moving and you're having, you know, a little bit from the renovation, but mostly from the market as well. Generally, you don't make, you know, you're not making money flipping properties in a down market. You know, if the market's going down, it's very hard to do that. So typically the market does the heavy lifting for you, and just the small cosmetic upgrades will help you rent the property, but will also, you know, increase that value that little bit as well.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I think a lot of people don't understand that, you know, renovations can only really be done once. You know, you can only really paint the building with a fresh coat of paint once every 7 years to have a phenomenal impact on the value of the property. And as you say, it's only really in a growing market where you've got a fresh coat of white paint, and it becomes more appealing for people to walk through the open home, and they might pay a little bit more for it. But I think people get caught up in like, oh, I have to buy a property that's really run down and do this massive renovation, where, you know, you can really do these little things that might significantly increase the value, but it's all that, you know, what are you getting in
and
return?
I would rather that, you know, like I'd rather buy something where I'm going, you know what, I don't have to spend 50,000, but I can spend 10,000 and make this house a lot better than what it is. And I don't have to, you know, have 6 to 8 weeks vacancies while I'm doing a massive renovation. I could do it in a week. Those are the types of properties that I would like, you know, the small uplifts. When it becomes major renovations, like I said, people are buying those properties because they're cheap. But that, again, they might be cheap because they're in a bad area and they need the renovation. So you've got to really know the market. You've got to really know what you're buying, and you've got to know, if you are renovating, you've got to know your numbers back to front, and you've got to know what you're in for before you buy it.
Yeah, spot on. And as you say, you know, you could do a 50K renovation and maybe increase the value of the property by 70K. So you're making 20K. Or you could, you know, find a property that needs a little touch of paint and a few fix-me-ups and spend 10K and increase the value of the property by 30K. So you're still making 20K.
Yeah.
It's a lot less headache. You know what I mean?
And the other thing is as well, like paint and carpets, right? I see this a lot where people are so emotional with investing. I don't like to be emotional. Everything's business, everything's numbers, everything is, you know, what's it going to produce for me at the end of the day? The property is a vehicle to get to where you need to be. It's not about I'm living there. And a lot of people will walk through and go in and go, oh, geez, it's rough because it needs a paint and carpet. And I can look through that and say, okay, $7,000 and this thing will look brand new again. So I guess with anyone that's wanting to invest is you're going to have to look past that. Because at the end of the day, if you go buy a brand new house, and this is what people do, they buy a brand new house because they want everything to be new. The tenants don't look after the property real well. They scratch the walls and the paint looks old. And within 7 years, the paint and carpets are worn out and it's not looking like it was 7 years ago when they bought it brand new. And then all of a sudden the depreciation of the building as well. So they haven't really made any money. Whereas if they bought that older house, realize what it is, you know, and all they're doing is buying a property now and trying to get it through from year 1 to year 15 to year 20 and rent that property out. And like I said, you know, for me, I even stretch out sometimes paint and carpets. It may need a paint and carpet, but if it can go another year or two, I'll make it go another year or two. And that's just because I know that the next tenants will get in there and just wear them out again.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a perfect scenario. And I even think about it like this. I mean, I just replaced, you know, one of the tires on my car popped 2 weeks ago or something. And, you know, I kind of looked at all 3 other tires and I thought, oh, that probably could do with a new one. So I bought 4 new tires, where really I could have just replaced the one tire, got the rest of the, you know, worth out of the existing tires and then replace them as they see fit. But then you'd have 4 different types of tires and it'd be all funny. But, you know, I think that's another classic example of, you know, really get that wear and tear usage out of the property, because as you say, it's a business, it's an investment. It's not an emotional decision. It doesn't really matter how you think it looks or feels or what what your impression of your property is. It's just a pure financial transaction. So I'm going from, some of your successes and the things that you look out for and the good things. I mean, what do you think have been some of your mistakes during your property investment journey, and what are the lessons you've learned from them?
Yeah, so in terms of mistakes, like I said, my biggest mistake was just not buying. Being scared and listening to other people was probably one of them. Once you understand how to build wealth, you know what to do, and once you've done it, it's very easy to look back on hindsight and what you've made, where you've made those mistakes. But when you are doing it and you're in the thick of it, people start to look for other people to seek validation. And I know I did. I mean, you're 19, you're 20, and you're seeking validation from older people, and typically you're seeking it from maybe family or friends, or maybe somebody that hasn't or isn't where you want to be. And that's what I noticed with myself. So those people almost scared me out of buying more property. And I remember when I, purchased my second property, everyone was happy for me. Once you go to third and fourth, people thought you were a bit crazy at that point, especially back then. And this was, mind you, after the GFC. So I'm buying properties where no one else wanted them. In 2011 and 12 was before the Sydney boom. So for me, my biggest mistake was listening to those people that hadn't achieved what I wanted. And if I had to listen to the people that had already had the success, they would have probably urged me to keep going and to trust myself. But what I noticed was, from like I said, I backed out of 2 deals, and those 2 deals cost me $1 million. And the reason why they cost me $1 million and why I backed out of them was I had to pay lender's mortgage insurance, right? And I have paid lender's mortgage insurance many times over. But for those particular deals, because they were really highly leveraged, they wanted about $20,000. So at that point, I'm thinking, you know what, it's not worth it. I'm not paying $20,000 in lender's mortgage insurance. And what I did was let go of the opportunity cost, right? Because I was only looking at the savings, and I wasn't looking at what that property could actually do for me. So I backed out of both of those deals. Like I said, those deals not only, and this is not even looking at the cash flow positive side that they would have, produced me forever. I'm just looking at now, and they've cost me $1 million in equity. So that was $1 million mistake that I look back on and I go, you know what? If I had my time over again, I would have done those deals. I would have accepted that, sometimes you've got to spend money to make money. And I feel like too many people are looking at the savings too hard, that they forget that the opportunities are passing them by. And I know that I did that in the early days, and I don't do it anymore. I actually now, when I look at it, I broke a loan for, I think it was 3.99%. I broke a loan for one of my properties, and I went to a 5.5% interest rate. Now, the saver mentality is, why the hell would you do that? For me, it was the opportunity, right? The opportunity arose that the new bank would give me $120,000. The $120,000 would buy me another property for $400,000 to $500,000. And I knew that $400,000 to $500,000 would go to $1 million, right? It would double over the next 15 years for me. I was buying in a good market. And because of that, I was happy to pay the extra, maybe $1,500 in interest or $2,000 in interest per year to be able to make $500,000. Whereas most people are so blindsided from the making of the money and the opportunity that they're looking at it's going to cost me an extra $1,500 a year. I'm not doing it. But they just miss the opportunity. So now I don't miss those opportunities. What I do is I actually now look at them from a standpoint, and I sit back for a few days and say, okay, I've got to look at not only the risk, the reward. I've got to look at, the savings, because everyone has that saving mentality and that always creeps in, but I've got to always look at the opportunity and where that can, take me as well.
Yeah, and it's a constant feedback of your delayed gratification. You're really looking at a property at a 10, 20, 30, 40-year lifespan. You're not looking at it at what it's going to cost you this year. You're thinking about how it's going to push you and build your wealth in the future. And I think that's the only way you can really look at property investing. It's not a 2-year flip, renovate, sell, go again. It's a sit and hold and accumulate capital growth over time. And I think just the opportunity cost. It's quite funny to hear most of people's mistakes, or what they say their mistakes are. It's not, I bought this property with termites in it, or it's not, I bought this property and didn't get a building inspection done. It's, I didn't get in earlier, or I missed out on these properties, and now I'm copping the opportunity cost, 5-10 years down the track. So that's a really good takeaway. And to get you where you are and the knowledge that you have, I mean, we've only been talking to you for 30 or 40 minutes, but you sound like you've got such a depth and an understanding of knowledge. I mean, what are the things that have really educated you? Is it kind of self-education, or has it been books or podcasts or anything that's really helped you along the journey?
Yeah, I mean, very early days was obviously my parents had the big influence of starting me into property. Then from there, building a team over time was critical. So I knew that I had to build a successful team. If I ever wanted to be successful, then I had to have a team of accountants and financial guys and brokers, and everyone had to be successful in their own right in what they did. So what I guess I had almost mini mentors in every area. If it was accounting, I had a mentor that would be able to help me out with that. It was depreciation, I had somebody on my side that could help me out and explain stuff to me. If it was a finance broker, it was a finance broker that had 20 properties and knew how to build a large portfolio. So that was probably, for me, the key was, making sure I had a good team around me to be able to learn off. In the early days, in terms of, I guess, things like books as well. So from a mindset point of view, was, everyone can't go past the sort of rich dad, poor dad mindset. So that was, for me, it was not too much looking too deep into that book, but more so the mindset of that book. I understood very early on that I'm never going to save my way to being wealthy. I'm never going to be able to just put money in the bank, week on, week out, save my wage and be able to get to where I want to be. That I had to think a different way. I had to leverage, and I had to know how to use leverage, because leverage can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. So I had to really understand that. So that was probably one of them. Another one, I guess, in the early days was Margaret Lomas as well. So she was, I guess, very influential back in those days, where she did a lot of, in terms of the research and all that type of stuff. So she more so got me to understand more broader markets. So to look outside your backyard, to actually start looking interstate, to understand that you've got to build a diverse portfolio, to, just not be looking at one state or one market, and that you've got to really view Australia as individual markets, and that you've got to really understand and know how to break those markets down to find, the key areas that are good for investing.
Yeah, I think they're two very key resources in having mentors around you. And then Margaret Lomas, she's kind of like the godfather, if you say, of this whole journey. She really, her books and her teachings, and even all of the older generation in the property space always talk about her. So I haven't read her book, but maybe I should actually. Maybe I'll get a copy.
Yeah, definitely.
Give it a bit of a read. So apart from the sort of typical real estate domain, all that sort of stuff, is there any like online resource or, specific tool that you sort of use to look for property? Like it could be, a council planning site or something like that, just something different that other investors might use to sort of research?
Yeah, I mean, well, when it comes down to researching areas, places like council websites, infrastructures, seeing what's going into the area, looking at, ABS, census data and all of that, and collecting population growth data and what's happening from that perspective, wages. And I use a lot of those resources. RP data is another one that I use as well. Obviously, that's a paid subscription, but in what I do today, we use that pretty much on a daily basis. So they're probably the biggest resources that we use. And then, reaching out to council, speaking to them, seeing how progressive they are and what we're looking, if you're going to look into an area to buy to start with. So they're probably some of the online tools that I would mainly use. But, assessing properties more so comes back down to RP data, and even just realestate.com, knowing what things are sold for, walking the streets and knowing where those locations are and why they sold for that. In terms of when you're considering buying a property, you've got to know what's sold in the area, but why it's sold for that price as well. Not just looking at it from that's a 4, 2 and 2, and this is a 4, 2 and 2, but is it in a different section of the area that commands a higher price? So yeah, just understanding that.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. I think that's you know, in this new digital age, I think everyone expects everything to be online. But even you just saying, you know, calling up the local council or talking to someone who's on the ground, even if it's just a real estate agent that's been working in the area for 20 years or whatever, that have a great grasp of what's going on, what's selling, how hot the market is, all that sort of stuff. So even getting down and talking to people face to face is sometimes the best way to go about it. But
Also talking with agents as well. I feel like a lot of people, when they're buying property, they feel like almost the real estate agents is against them. But it's very far from the truth. It's the other way around. If you need to actually get in with the real estate agents in the area, they've got to know what you're looking for so that when it does come up, that they can give you a call on that. They're not, like I said, they're there to bring a buyer and a seller together. And at the end of the day, they're not there really to rip anyone off. Yes, they are in the best interest of the seller, but at the end of the day, they're the matchmaker for the deal. So you've got to be in with them so that they can give you access to that deal before other people.
Yeah, spot on. And I think just having that relationship with them, knowing that you're there, you're looking, you're hungry, what you are looking out for, all factors into, you know, something coming up on the market and them thinking of you straight away, and that sort of gives you that sort of first step ahead, or gets your foot in the door at least.
Yeah.
So for a guy who potentially could retire if he wanted to right now, you sound like you're still pretty hungry and still pretty motivated, and obviously you've got your business up and running. But I mean, what does motivate you to do everything that you do? Like, what gets you up in the morning? Do you have a favorite quote?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm always listening to, you know, either podcasts or YouTube, and I guess different influences. For me, what gets me out of bed is, I guess, you just love what you do. So, you know, instead of having it as work, you start to, I guess, fall in love with the process of what you're doing. So I don't think I could ever be a person that, you know, it doesn't matter how wealthy you become, I couldn't be a person that just sits around and does nothing all day. I would always be looking to grow, you know, somewhere in some avenue. And for me, what I've realized is now the focus is, I guess, I lost a little bit of focus on myself a bit there for a little while, because my focus was really turned to the business and how can I help other people. And I realized that, you know, if you give tremendous value to other people and teach other people what you know, that will come back in spades in the future. So I guess that I've made that my mission. How do I deliver as much value as I possibly can to the marketplace in what I do? And I know that will come back to me, and I'll build a legacy around that. And I guess the other thing, you know, in terms of quotes and stuff like that, I mean, I like Ed Milet. So, you know, your obsessions become your possession. So whatever you obsess about, and that ends up becoming what you get. I've always been an obsessive person. Everything I do has been, you know, I have to be the best in everything. So I can't just walk through and play a sport. I've got to be the best at that sport. The same with property. I couldn't have just gone and bought one property. I've got to buy as many as I can, and I've got to be the best at what I do. So I guess being obsessed with what you want. So for me, it was being obsessed with creating wealth, being obsessed with helping others create wealth. And, you know, whatever your obsessions are, they become your possessions.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a good one, and it resonates with me really well as well. But just finally, I mean, what advice would you give our generation on getting started?
I think everything takes time. You know, I look at my journey now and I'm like, okay, geez, I've done so much, but a lot of that has compounded over the last sort of 3 to 5 years, whereas the first sort of 5 years was really difficult and tough. So don't look to get rich quick. As soon as you start to look to get rich quick and you're buying Bitcoin and you're trying to buy the next thing, you're looking for that next shiny object to make you wealthy. That's when you become undone. That's when you're not focusing on the long-term goal, the long-term wealth. This is a journey, right? Building wealth is a journey. You will not get rich quick. It takes hard work. It takes dedication. It takes studying. It takes everything that you have to become successful. So be prepared to put 10 to 15 years into that. The other thing I'd say is just don't listen to people that don't have what you want. You know, your friends and family, they're good, you know, to have around you, and just don't take financial advice off them. Don't take, you know, advice off the people that don't have what you are seeking at the end of the day, because sometimes they can be the most damaging in your success as well, because they're almost talking you out of something that could help you be, where you want to be in life, whether that's starting a business or whether that's building a real estate empire. Your dreams and no one else knows them. So you've got to trust yourself enough to be able to say, you know what, doesn't matter how much failure I go through, I'll keep getting up and doing it again until I succeed.
Mate, that's some phenomenal advice. And I really appreciate your time today and coming onto the show and sharing your story and delving into some of the numbers there and walking us through your process. So once again, mate, I really appreciate you coming on and thanks for your time.
No worries, Jordan. Thanks for having me as well. It was a pleasure to, discuss my portfolio and my views and values. So yeah, it was awesome. Hopefully we can do it again in the future.
Daniel's story clearly demonstrates that it doesn't matter if you're earning minimum wage, grinding it out while you're young. If you put your head down, use your money wisely, it's phenomenal what you can achieve, even before the age of 30. I hope you enjoy this episode because I got so much out of it. I'm always looking for more guests to come onto the show. If you're under 30 and have one or more investment properties, whether it's good, bad or ugly, I would love to talk to you about it. The main focus is to help other soon-to-be young investors with tips and tricks along the journey. Learn from the mistakes that we have made and ignite the fire to set themselves up financially for the rest of their lives. If you're interested in sharing your story, you can go to jordandeyong.com/podcasts, where there's a podcast inquiry button at the top that will guide you through the next steps. Also, if you want to see what else I'm up to, you can head over to my YouTube channel to see the latest. Just type Jordan De Jong into YouTube and I should pop up somewhere. If you're keen for more content like this, make sure you subscribe and please leave us a review with any feedback for future podcasts. And until next time, happy house hunting.